a presidential candidate about, should you have bounties for whistleblowers? I remember Ernie Fitzgerald catching him as he was going into the ACLU building beside the Methodist building and saying hello to him and catching up with him. And he told me, don't be a whistleblower. When you're over at the Labor Department, don't be a whistleblower, because he still had the scars. Yeah. So do we need to nurture whistleblowers better, or nurture the Department of Justice better to prosecute these things? They say, oh, you can't prosecute these companies because we'll be caught with our pants down. If there's ever a war, we got to keep them in business at whatever price.
Well, one of the good developments that came out of these hearings was that Congress enacted what's called the Whistleblower Act, which is intended to protect whistleblowers both in the government and in the private sector, and rewards them with a portion of any amount of funds recovered in a prosecution or civil action against a contractor, including tax funds. So if a contractor fails to report his income correctly and has to pay a fine or reimburse the government, or the SEC files charges against a contractor for not providing accurate information to the Securities Exchange Commission for the investing public, or for any reason, there is encouragement and incentives for whistleblowers to come forward.
Well, that's great, but is it working? So is the situation changed now that that act is passed?
The best way to gauge it at this point is to look at the overall defense budget, and to see whether there seems to be better discipline on the defense budgeting process.
Take us down the path.
Is that right? We've only got about 15 minutes left before we're done with this show today. So tell us quickly a little bit about just sort of how big the defense budget is and how much you attribute this issue of cost overruns and corporate malfeasance to this huge size of defense spending now.
Did you say there's going to be another show?
Well, we're
come on back, Richard.
Time is one of the things we've got a limit on.
Although I have to say that our guest that we're cheering for because he was hospitalized and we want him to be well, Chris Hellman wrote a piece that we'll post on our website about the $1.2 trillion defense budget, which is an annual defense budget that nobody wants you to know about. And so we want you to know about that. And we'll share Chris's good analysis. We're sorry that he couldn't share it himself. Should we remind people what $1 trillion is, Arnie?
Let's see what
$1 trillion.
What is $1 trillion?
Yeah. Well, let's start counting now.
Yeah,
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And so, do you want to read this or shall I?
Go ahead. You just read it quickly.
Okay. 1 million. Okay. Million's a lot. Big, right? Seconds. Okay. Let's just do this in seconds. 1 million seconds was 12 days ago. Okay. December 1st. 1 billion seconds is 31 years ago, or about when President Carter said, we're not going to participate in the Olympics in the Soviet Union. 1 trillion seconds, on the other hand, is 29,700 BC or BCE, depending upon your style. So there's a little bit of a factor of difference between a million and a billion and a trillion. And what Chris Hellman was talking about was that it's a $1.2 trillion budget. But I'll turn to this wonderful man who's come up all the way from the Washington, D.C. area and is the vice chair of the Economists for Peace and Security to help us understand what's been happening with these budgets.
So is it, how much has the military budget grown over time, or is it stable?
It may be becoming stable, but for the 10 years that followed basically the election of George Bush, from about 2001 or 2 to 2010, the budget grew by leaps and bounds.
I've heard it's about doubled.
It actually doubled from roughly $350 billion to $700 billion when you include the wars in Iraq Afghanistan. And that, of course, is a huge increase. In fact, it's so high now that it's higher than it ever was during the Cold War.
So to me, this
It is higher
right.
than it ever was since World War II, when
Right.
we were involved in a world
Right,
war,
right.
you know, over the whole globe.
So is it that we are under such extreme threat that we need that much defense in order to be safe? Or is this not really about defense at all, but perhaps about something else? I mean, what's your speculation on that? I want to ask Ed the same question.
There are potential threats, but there are no real threats at this time. I mean, people, you know, could worry about the nuclear threat and various other potential actions against the United States, but there's no country you could point to as a threat, a vital threat to U.S. Vital interests. But there is a sort of explanation of why the defense budget has grown so high, and is so much greater than any other part of the federal budget. And the reason is, in a word, politics. It's not economics. It's not military analysis. It's not threat analysis. It's politics. And the fact is that it has become politically convenient, especially in Congress, but also in the White House, to be in favor of a strong national defense, stronger than we have now.
Who could be against a strong national defense?
Right, and we always want to be
Stronger.
And the Defense Department always wants its budgets to be larger.
Right.
Now, you know, really all government agencies would like their budgets to be larger. But there's a reason why it's so easy for the Defense Department to get its wishes. And the reason has to do with the fact that it is politically popular to be in favor of strengthening our national defense. And so how do you strengthen the national defense if you're a politician? Well, if you're president, you say you're going to enlarge the Defense Department, enlarge the military establishment. And if you're a member of Congress, or a House member, or a Senate member, what you do is you vote, you say you will, and you vote in favor of larger defense budgets. Now, it got to the point, you know, really long ago, that Republicans would attack Democrats because they felt they were weak on national defense. Now, why were they supposedly so weak on national defense? Well, because they like to look at the defense budget and to assess whether it was appropriate. In view of very conservative, hardline members of Congress, all you had to do was whatever the generals wanted you to do. And if the Pentagon wanted more money, it was your duty to approve those requests. And so it became a tried and true formula for political success. And of course, Democrats did some of this as well, to be in favor of large defense budgets. Now, how did it get as large as it is now? And why did it double since the early century? It doubled because, first of all, there was the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but even before that, there had been a kind of creeping up of defense budgets. And once the wars began, sort of all the controls were taken off. And they were taken off not only for the wars, but for parts of the defense budget that had nothing to do with the war. In fact, written memorandum went out, and President Bush himself advised the military services that when they prepared their budgets for the war, they should include items that were not necessarily related to the war. Well, this was, you know,
a grab bag,
an invitation to the services to all their wish lists, and to ask for anything they wanted, and they did. And
they got
Congress was, you know, controlled by President Bush's party, and instead of reviewing and performing its constitutional duty to perform checks and balances, it just rolled over and became a rubber stamp
Wow.
for whatever it was that was being proposed. And that's how it got to be.
And I have a question for you. You're a student of history, of course, so you know that up until World War II, we had a Department of War.
Yes.
And then right at the time when the nuclear age started, and in effect it was no longer possible to defend ourselves at all, it became the Department of Defense.
Right.
So given what this picture that Richard is painting, the role of the defense contractors, do you think that this term defense is really a euphemism?
Well, I think it's good staging. I mean, I think it's clever, a clever change, because I think the ordinary American, even though we haven't experienced real war on our soil since the Civil War, still finds war odious, not just because of the quotes of our presidents that we've shared, but because they know that, and the types of things that our warriors, the stories that they bring back, like
It's
Will.
real.
Yeah. But I remind you that when the Pentagon was built, we had a very different mindset about what war was about and what happens after war. Because the Pentagon, the 5 million miles of corridor in that giant building, one of the biggest in the world, was built so that after the war, it could be converted into a hospital.
Wow, interesting. Wow. So do you think, Ed, that with this focus right now on the federal deficit as being something that's been captivating Capitol Hill for the last year and that's going to go on for months more, do you think we have an opening right now politically to get greater scrutiny on military spending?
No, because not because of that, Arnie, but I do think we have an opening.
Okay, what's the opening?
The opening is the wonderful young people and old people in the Occupy movement, the Occupy Wall Street. And if you look at history, J.P. Morgan made a fortune in the Civil War by buying up defective rifles and selling them, 5 and 10 times as much, even though when the soldiers used them, it blew off their thumbs. And after the war, there was a little investigation, and it was ho hum, it was wartime, ain't that too bad. These problems are very deep rooted, and so I commend the courage of the people like Ernie Fitzgerald that are willing to stand up for what is right, but also the young people that are saying, wait a minute, we've got to get a handle on this. Now there is discussion of deficits, but I remind you, Arnie, that recently it was released in Washington that all the other agencies except the Department of Defense did an audit, were able to do an audit of themselves. And we'll post some of the scandalous articles on our website to remind people that, wait a minute, they should account and have an audit for all these billions and billions of dollars.
If I could say a few words.
I want to know if you can tell us whether we can cut military spending.
I think we can, and I think, as I indicated earlier, there's been a leveling off under President Obama, and no more requests for increased defense spending. Under the law that set up the super committee, they provided for what they called sequestration, which means if they didn't come up with a solution for future spending, there would be some automatic cuts beginning next
January 2013.
2013. Now, there already was one cut ordered for the Defense Department under the present administration, and together with that, what would happen in 2013 would be a cut of $1 trillion. That famous number you guys were looking at, over the next 10 years, which would be roughly $200 billion a year. Now, that's a very substantial cut. It would be something of a rollback. It wouldn't be as huge as it sounds, because the defense budget has gotten so huge that $200 billion a year off a $750 billion budget isn't that big in percentage terms. It would be about equivalent to the cuts that were made after Vietnam, or when there was a 30% cut in defense spending, and after.
So you think that that's something, because on Capitol Hill they're saying, oh, that could never happen. That's too big. You're saying it's doable from your perspective.
It's very doable, especially since President Obama said he would veto any bill that was sent over to change
Yeah.
the sequestration or the cuts that were ordered by the law setting up that super committee. So now there are members of Congress who will try to change the law, but they don't have the votes to overcome a veto.
Yeah. Richard, we could walk out of the studio right now and you could find yourself running into a presidential candidate walking down Elm Street. So what would you want to ask or tell to one of the candidates that is frequenting our state?
Well, you know, the primaries that have occurred so far have revealed so much misinformation and lack of real solid knowledge on the part of the candidates who have been in these primaries, that it would be difficult for me to believe I would get a real responsive comment back from any of them. Now, possibly former Governor Huntsman would be able to respond. I would ask the question whether they would agree with President Obama that the cuts to our budget to reduce the deficit should be made, and whether those cuts should include the Defense Department.
Right, great. And in a few seconds, what do you want the voters to know?
I want the voters to stay informed. There's this idea that, in some minds, that we're headed away from democracy, and maybe we are. But you know, what history teaches us is that there's no way to predict what's going to happen in government. There's no way to predict, and there never has been, that we will stay democratic or that we will go towards a dictatorship. It's really up to the public. The public has to stay informed, and the people have to vote to select members of the government to do the right thing. So they have to know that their representatives are also informed and will be and do the right thing once they get into office.
There's some candidates or people in Congress right now that are paying attention to these issues that we should keep an eye on, do you think?
Well, you know, on the Democratic side, there are no primaries because
I understand that. But I'm just in terms of members of Congress, I mean, you work for Senator Proxmire. You're saying we don't have a Proxmire type anymore to look to for leadership on this?
I haven't noticed anyone coming forward to do the kind of groundbreaking investigations that Proxmire was willing to do.
But we do have on the Democratic side, we do have a primary in New Hampshire. There are candidates running. We will post some of their answers to the original question that we asked. If you are president, will you count civilian deaths? There are going to be more questions that we'll be asking. And we have our rewards at the Manchester Diner for those. R.J. Norton is winning one of these. Or we also have a gift certificate at Consuelos. But I think we should commend, given what Richard and I think we all have been saying about how intimidated people are by, you're not patriotic, you're willing to question the defense budget, and commend Congressman Paul, who really stands out among the Republican crowd by saying, no, we need to bring the troops home. We don't need 750 major bases around the world. And so he, at least, is not intimidated and has the strength to say, no, this is my position. I can't think of any other candidate that is doing that.
Well, there is a congressman I think you were once associated with on the House side who would agree with Congressman Paul.
Right, yes, Congressman Kucinich, yes. Okay, so yes.
Wrap us up here, Ed.
Okay.
We are out of time, but I want to thank both Richard Kaufman and Ed Helm for bringing us together for this show.
Well, and thank you, Arnie, for your continued leadership in this great state.
And the question of democracy or empire is in the end up to all of us. Thank you for watching.